The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee and buttered pastries filled the small cafe as Keanu Reeves stepped inside, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind he preferred. Just another ordinary day where he could enjoy a simple cup of coffee without the weight of his celebrity status pressing down on him. The line wasn't too long, just a few customers ahead of him, chatting quietly as the baristas worked behind the counter. As he waited, his gaze drifted toward the large window that faced the street. Outside, hunched over on the sidewalk, sat a man wrapped in a tattered blanket. His clothes were worn thin, his beard unkempt, and his eyes tired, distant, spoke of a life that had been anything but kind. The world bustled past him, indifferent to his existence. People walked by, barely sparing him a glance, as if he were part of the concrete beneath their feet. Keanu watched for a moment, something tugging at his chest. He had seen this scene 1,000 times, on different streets in different cities, but today he felt compelled to act. He stepped out of the line and pushed open the glass door, the bell above it jingling softly. The homeless man looked up, startled, his expression guarded as if he expected another dismissal, another rejection. "Hey man," Keanu said, his voice kind but casual. "You hungry?" The man blinked, as if unsure he had heard correctly. His fingers gripped the edge of his blanket, and for a moment, Keanu thought he might refuse out of pride or fear. But then, slowly, he nodded. Keanu smiled. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." The man hesitated, glancing at the cafe's entrance, then back at Keanu. There was disbelief in his eyes, a flicker of hope battling against years of disappointment. With a quiet, almost whispered thank you, he gathered his blanket and rose unsteadily to his feet. Together they stepped inside, the sudden warmth of the cafe enveloping them. The conversations at the nearby tables quieted slightly as customers glanced their way. Keanu ignored the stares, guiding the man toward the counter. The barista, a young woman with a kind smile, greeted them with a nod. "What would you like?" Keanu asked, turning to the man. The man shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between the glowing menu boards and the expectant barista. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. Just a coffee is fine," he murmured. Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Come on, man, you've got to eat something too." He turned back to the barista. "Get him whatever he wants, and a sandwich too. Make it 2. The homeless man looked at him, eyes shining with gratitude, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu simply shrugged, offering a warm smile. "You don't have to." For the first time in a long while, the man smiled back. But just as the moment settled, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "I'm sorry, but we don't serve people like him here." The warmth in the cafe seemed to vanish in an instant. Keanu turned toward the voice, his relaxed demeanor tightening as he locked eyes with a woman standing behind the counter, her arms crossed, lips pursed in distaste. The manager. The homeless man took a step back, as if he had already expected this outcome. Keanu, however, hadn't. The air in the cafe seemed to thicken, tension crackling like a static charge. The soft murmur of conversation died as customers turned toward the counter, drawn in by the sharp edge of the manager's voice. Linda, a woman in her mid-50s with tightly curled blonde hair and a stiff pressed uniform, stood with her arms crossed, her mouth twisted in a look of open disdain. Her gaze flicked between Keanu and the homeless man, her lip curling in distaste. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut, "but we don't serve his kind here." Keanu's easy expression didn't waver, but something in his eyes darkened. His stance shifted, subtle but firm, as if he had suddenly anchored himself to the ground. The homeless man beside him shrank back instinctively, his fingers gripping the edge of his tattered coat. He had seen this scene before, too many times. The rejection, the disgust, the unspoken rule that some people were simply unwelcome. He started to turn, ready to retreat before this could get any worse, but Keanu didn't move. "Excuse me?" Keanu's voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, a quiet authority that made Linda's smirk falter for just a second. Linda straightened, her heels clicking against the tile floor as she squared her shoulders. "I said, we don't serve people like him here." She spoke slowly, deliberately, like she was addressing a child. "We have standards. He's bad for business." The silence in the cafe was suffocating. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. A man at a corner table lowered his newspaper, watching with interest. A young woman near the counter pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. The barista who had been taking their order looked frozen in place, her smile long gone. Keanu exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening just a fraction. He placed a steady hand on the homeless man's shoulder, as if grounding him. "I wasn't aware kindness had a dress code," he said, his voice still calm but with an unmistakable steel underneath. "I'm buying him a meal. You have a problem with that?" Linda let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but we have rules. If you want to eat here, that's your choice. But he needs to leave." Keanu didn't react the way she expected. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, very deliberately, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and took out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it on the counter between them. "This should cover the food," he said, "and maybe enough for you to rethink your rules." The barista's eyes widened. Someone near the back let out a quiet chuckle. Linda's face flushed red, her fingers twitching at her sides. "I don't care how much money you have," she snapped. "We have standards here, and I won't let this place turn into a shelter." Keanu's fingers curled slightly at his sides. For a moment it looked like he might say something else, but then, slowly he nodded. "All right," he said softly, and then without another word, he turned. The homeless man hesitated, looking between Keanu and the untouched money on the counter. His shoulders slumped, his hope deflating as he realized there was no place for him here. But just as Keanu reached the door, someone spoke. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" A ripple of recognition spread through the cafe. Someone else whispered, "No way." A man near the window leaned forward, eyes widening. The young woman with the phone started recording. Linda's confident smirk vanished. A heavy silence hung in the air, thick with tension as Keanu stood his ground. His voice, calm but carrying unmistakable authority, sliced through the quiet hum of the cafe. "So, just to be clear," he said, his dark eyes locked onto Linda. "You're refusing service to someone just because he's homeless?" A hush fell over the room, the weight of his words settling over every person watching. Linda, arms still crossed, barely hesitated before shrugging, her smirk still plastered across her face. "I don't make the rules," she said, tilting her chin up slightly. "I just enforce them." The homeless man took a small step backward, as if shrinking into himself, already preparing for the inevitable outcome. He had been here before, too many times. He knew how this ended. But Keanu didn't move. His posture remained relaxed, but there was a quiet intensity in his presence, something unreadable in the way he watched Linda. Near the register, a young employee named Jason had stopped wiping down the counter. His brow furrowed, his mouth slightly open as he stared at Keanu, recognition dawning like a slow-burning flame. "Wait a second," he muttered, nudging his co-worker beside him. "Is that—" The whisper spread like wildfire. One customer leaned toward another, murmuring something under their breath. A man at the corner table glanced over his newspaper, his brows lifting. The young woman near the counter, the one who had started recording earlier, raised her phone higher, her mouth parting in realization. Then, finally, someone said it aloud. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" The ripple of awareness surged through the cafe. Someone gasped. A chair scraped against the floor as another customer shifted for a better view. Phones emerged from pockets, camera lenses focusing on the man who had, until now, seemed like just another kind stranger. Linda's smug expression flickered, her confidence suddenly shaken as she glanced around, seeing the way people were staring, the way they were all watching her now. Jason, still frozen near the counter, swallowed hard. He had seen every Keanu Reeves movie at least twice. He knew the stories, the viral moments, the way Keanu was universally loved, not just for his movies, but for who he was as a person. The guy who took the subway, donated most of his fortune, treated everyone with respect. And Linda had just tried to humiliate him. A nervous laugh escaped her lips, forced and unnatural. "Look, she started, but her voice faltered when she noticed someone recording right in front of her. Keanu's expression remained unchanged, unreadable. He wasn't angry, wasn't even scolding her, but something about his calm, unwavering presence was making her squirm. The homeless man, still standing beside him, looked around uncertainly, his eyes darting between Keanu and the crowd that had suddenly gathered. For once, people were seeing him, not as an inconvenience, not as something to ignore, but as a person. Linda's fingers twitched at her sides. She swallowed, glancing at the phones pointed in her direction, at the wide-eyed faces of her employees. The realization was hitting her too late. She hadn't just refused service to a man in need, she had refused Keanu Reeves. And now the whole world was about to know. The fallout was immediate and unstoppable. Within an hour of the encounter, the first video hit the internet. A short clip, barely 2 minutes long, but enough to ignite a firestorm. The footage was clear, capturing everything. The arrogance in Linda's voice, the disgust on her face as she denied service, and the way Keanu Reeves remained calm yet firm in the face of her cruelty. At first it started as a few reposts, then it spread like wildfire. The headline variations came fast and brutal. Cafe manager kicks out homeless man, then learns who she just insulted. Keanu Reeves denied service while helping homeless man. The internet reacts. Kindness versus cruelty. Keanu's humility exposes ugly truth about society. Within hours, the video had millions of views. The cafe's name was trending, but not in the way Linda had ever wanted. The comment sections exploded with outrage. Imagine being this entitled. "Keanu handled this better than I ever could. This cafe is done. Watch how fast they go out of business. People like Linda are exactly what's wrong with the world. Keanu just wanted to buy a guy a meal, and this is how they reacted?" And then came the reviews. Thousands of people flooded the cafe's online ratings with 1-star reviews, leaving blistering comments. "Rude staff, disgusting attitude, wouldn't eat here if they PA'd me. They refuse to serve the homeless but have no problem serving humiliation? Disgusting. Fire the manager or shut this place down." It wasn't just angry internet users, real customers were walking away. By the next morning, boycotts were already underway. People who had been loyal regulars swore to never return. The cafe, once a bustling hotspot, now had empty tables. The staff whispered nervously among themselves, checking their phones every few minutes, watching the digital storm unfold in real time. Linda, still in denial, stood behind the counter, arms crossed, her face red with frustration. "It's just internet nonsense," she muttered to her employees. "It'll blow over." But as she refreshed the cafe's Instagram page, a new post caught her eye. It wasn't a news article, it wasn't an angry comment. It was Keanu Reeves himself. He had said nothing about the incident before, but now, on his social media, he had posted a single photo of him and the homeless man sitting at a different cafe, sharing a meal. The caption was simple: "Kindness should never be a privilege," and just like that, the world saw the difference between them. Keanu's humility, Linda's arrogance, and the internet had already decided which one deserved to win. The cafe, once a bustling spot for coffee lovers and professionals on their lunch breaks, became a ghost town overnight. Tables that were once filled with chattering customers sat empty. Baristas who used to rush to keep up with orders now stood behind the counter, idle and anxious. The 1-star reviews kept pouring in, and every time someone refreshed their phone, another wave of outrage flooded in. The cafe's owner, Mr. Halston, an older man with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude, sat in his office, staring at his laptop screen with growing horror. The news had picked up the story. Influencers were dragging his business through the mud, and even corporate brands were distancing themselves from his establishment. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, not with new customers, but with complaints. "Get rid of that manager or you'll never see another customer again," one furious voice snapped before slamming the phone down. Halston had seen enough. With a deep sigh, he stood and stormed toward the front of the cafe, where Linda stood with her arms crossed, still trying to convince the few remaining employees that this was just internet drama. The moment she saw Mr. Halston's furious expression, the blood drained from her face. "You're fired," he said, his voice cold and final. Linda opened her mouth, stunned. "But—" "I don't want to hear it," he snapped. "Get your things and leave, right now." A few employees exchanged glances, some relieved, others too shocked to speak. Linda stood frozen for a moment, her pride crumbling in real time. Then, with a sharp inhale, she grabbed her purse, straightened her uniform, and marched out without looking back. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves was nowhere near the cafe. Instead of feeding into the chaos, he had already moved on, choosing kindness over confrontation. With no fanfare, no cameras, and no need for validation, he had simply taken the homeless man Daniel to a quiet, family-owned restaurant down the street. The owner, recognizing Keanu immediately, greeted them warmly and seated them in a cozy corner booth. There, Keanu let Daniel order whatever he wanted. They talked, not about the incident, not about the cafe, just two men sharing a meal, one helping another without expecting anything in return. Cucini. Hours later, a journalist finally caught up with Keanu, hoping for a headline-worthy quote about the cafe's scandal. "Mr. Reeves," she asked, microphone in hand, "what do you think about the backlash against the cafe, about the manager being fired?" Keanu paused for a moment, then gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Kindness should never be a privilege," he said simply. That was all. No anger, no gloating, just a quiet reminder of what really mattered. The journalist posted the clip online and, just like that, his words went viral. People weren't just talking about the cafe's failure anymore. They were talking about the power of kindness, about humility, about the lesson in humanity Keanu had unknowingly taught the world. And, in the end, that was the real story. Within weeks, the cafe that had once been a thriving hotspot stood eerily quiet, its doors locked, its windows dark. The sign that once boasted the best coffee in town was now covered with crude graffiti, a final testament to its spectacular downfall. The one-star reviews had never stopped coming, and despite firing Linda, Mr. Halston couldn't undo the damage. The public had made their decision. They wanted nothing to do with a business that had turned kindness away. By the time the official closing announcement was posted online, no one was surprised. The backlash had been too intense, too widespread, and with no customers left to serve, the cafe had no choice but to shut down permanently. Jason, the young employee who had recognized Keanu, had seen it coming. He had watched the cafe implode from the inside, knowing full well that a simple act of kindness could have saved it. But now he had moved on. After quitting the cafe, he had landed a job at a local coffee shop with a much better reputation, one that didn't judge customers by their appearance, one that valued people over profits. On his first day, as he served a cup of coffee to a man who looked like he had been living on the streets, he smiled to himself, remembering Keanu's words, "Kindness should never be a privilege." Meanwhile, the story of Keanu's small act of kindness had taken on a life of its own. Across the world, thousands of people were inspired to take action. Donations to homeless shelters and food banks skyrocketed, with people sending money in Keanu's name, honoring his quiet generosity. Some left notes, "For Keanu, because kindness matters." Saw the cafe story. Wanted to help someone today. Let's turn this into something good. And Daniel? The homeless man Keanu had tried to help was no longer invisible. Thanks to the viral attention, local organizations had tracked him down, offering him a place to stay, a warm bed, clean clothes, and a chance to rebuild his life. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He had hope. When reporters tried to ask Keanu about the impact of his kindness, he simply waved them off, shaking his head with a small smile. "It was never about me," he said. And that was the truth. Keanu hadn't done it for attention. He hadn't done it for praise. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. And in the end, that was what people remembered most. Not the cafe's downfall, not Linda's arrogance, but the moment one man chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. And that, in the smallest, simplest way, changed the world.